Hi, I'm Josie Danielski. I'm a fifth grader at Chickering School in Dover, Massachusetts. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the Virginia, Maine's first ship.
The Kennebec River in Maine begins at Moosehead Lake and flows through Bath, which is 10 miles from the river's mouth at the Atlantic Ocean. Today, Bath is a small city of 12,000 people which builds ships for the U.S. Navy. The tradition of building ships in Bath goes back many years, and hundreds of wooden ships have been built at shipyards on the Kennebec River. Here is a picture of the first ship ever built on the Kennebec River. It was built in 1607 and was named Virginia. It was the first ship built by Englishmen in North America. It was built at the Popham Colony by the first colonists who settled in New England in 1607. This settlement was called the Popham Colony because of the man who had supplied much of the money to establish it was Sir John Popham, the Chief Justice of English Court. He worked for Queen Elizabeth. She died in 1603, so when the colonists set out in 1607, King James was the king, and he was the one who gave permission to settle in North America. Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. After that, several European nations became interested in America. They hoped to find riches, gain power, and find a shortcut to China to find spices. The Spanish had explored and settled in Florida, the Caribbean, and south of there. The French settled in the north in what they called Canada. So the English understood that they could settle in between. They called this whole coastline Virginia, named after Queen Elizabeth, who was called the Virgin Queen because she never married or had any children. The coast of Virginia extended from what is now the state of Georgia to Maine. Prior to the settlement of the Popham Colony in 1607, the English and other nations had been exploring the area for many years. The first English exploration was the voyage of John Cabot, who sailed from England in 1497 and found Newfoundland. His voyage was supported by King Henry VII. Perhaps the most important thing he found was codfish. After John Cabot's travels, there were other explorations during the 1500s, but most visitors were fishermen and whalers. By 1604, English fishermen were living on an island off the Maine coast called Yarmouth, about 15 miles east of the mouth of the Kennebec River. In 1605, George Weymouth, an English explorer, visited Maine at a place called Pemaquid. He tried to establish trade with the Wabanaki Indians living around Pemaquid. As he left, he captured and brought back to England 5 Native Americans, including a chief. At about the same time, the French explorer Samuel de Champlain visited the Maine coast in 1605, looking for a good place for the French to settle. He even explored up the Kennebec River to where the city of Bath is now located. In 1608, he eventually chose Quebec as France's main settlement in Canada. The expedition to settle in Maine, in the northern part of what the English called Virginia, was sponsored by a company in London called the Virginia Company. At the same time the Virginia Company sent colonists to Maine, they also sent another group to settle in the southern part of Virginia. Both these groups left England in 1607. The group headed for the south, settled on the James River, and started a colony which took the name Jamestown. The Popham Colony and the Jamestown Colony were contemporaries and were very aware of each other. The Popham Colony's 2 ships with about 100 men and boys left Plymouth, England in May 1607. They arrived at the mouth of the Kennebec River in August and started building a fort which they named Fort St. George. The Popham colonists brought along a shipwright, a man who knew how to build ships. This is a picture of one of his tools that was found during an excavation at the site of the colony. It is a caulking iron that was used to caulk the gaps between the planks of the ship to prevent leaks. So at the same time as the Popham colonists were building Fort St. George, they started to build a ship. This is a drawing from an old picture of the fort. They needed a small ship to use in order to explore and trade in the area. They called this ship a pinnace. They made good progress on both projects, but soon realized that they weren't going to have enough food to last all winter. They probably thought that they would have been able to trade with the local native people for food, but this did not work out. We really don't know why, but perhaps it was because previous explorers, like George Weymouth, had been disrespectful to the natives. Or perhaps the Popham colonists themselves did not know how to deal well or know how to speak with the local natives. In any case, there wasn't going to be enough food to feed everyone. So in October, 45 people who were meant to stay went home on the two ships. The winter was especially cold and icy that year. Trade with the natives for fur had not gone well. They had hoped to find gold or other valuable minerals, but they did not. Their leader died of pneumonia. So by the next year, 1608, when a supply ship arrived, it had become clear that the colony was unlikely to be successful. In the fall of 1608, they packed up and returned to England. The small ship that they had built and named Virginia returned to England with them. It was the first ship built by Englishmen in North America. In 1609, the Virginia, owned by the Virginia Company, sailed back across the Atlantic to Jamestown. Any record of it disappeared soon after that. 12 years later, Englishmen and women on the Mayflower tried to settle again in New England. After 1614, the northern part of Virginia's name had changed to New England. In 1620, the Pilgrims arrived, and their colony was named Plymouth. They were more successful than the Popham colony. Their success was in part due to the fact that they had gotten along well with the Native Americans. They actually had a person with them who had experience dealing with Native Americans in Jamestown and could speak their language. The success of the Pilgrims was helped to an extent by the experience of the Popham colonists. The Popham colony was an important stepping stone for the colonization of the place we now call the United States. Before the Popham colonists abandoned Fort St. George, a Mr. Hunt drew a detailed picture of the fort. This picture had been lost until rediscovered in 1890. For years, the actual location of the fort was not certain. In 1994, an archaeological dig began, and after several years, found evidence of where the buildings had been. They also found artifacts like Old English coins, wine bottles, pieces of pottery jugs, and tools. Most of the people involved in the dig were volunteers who had enjoyed the experience. They were mostly from the local area. It was they who decided that we ought to build a reproduction of the Virginia and got the project started. The Virginia project, Maine's first ship, was organized in 1997. Before they started to build the full-size reproduction of the Virginia, they practiced by building a smaller boat called a shallop. This type of boat was often pulled behind or carried on the deck of a larger ship to be used to go ashore. A group of high school students helped in its construction. Since being built, the shallop is moored in front of the shipyard where the Virginia is being built. The shallop now sails on the Kennebec River. In 2011, they began building the Virginia under the direction of Rob Stevens, an experienced shipbuilder. Rob taught the volunteers how to build the ship. First, the keel was cut and laid. The keel is a long, thick piece of wood that is the foundation for the ship. It is made of white oak, as is most of the rest of the ship, because it has been found to be a wood that will last many years without rotting. The Virginia's keel is 38 feet long. This diagram shows the parts of the ship that are going to be described: the keel, the frames, the deck. After laying the keel, U-shaped frames are built. Sections of the frame, called futtocks, are sawed out of a slab of wood. The futtocks are laid out on a curve in 2 layers, which are held together by wooden pins called trennels. The word trennel comes from tree nail. Holes are drilled through the futtocks. Then the trennels are pounded through the holes with a big wooden hammer to hold the frame together. Once built, the frames are raised on top of the keel 18 inches apart. Once they are in place, the frames are held in place by a second piece of oak called the keelson. Here is Rob discussing what to do next. Here are some kids getting a good view of the inside of the ship. The front of the ship is called the bow. The bow is made from a large piece of white oak called the stem attached to the front of the keel. The back of the ship is the stern. A large piece of wood called a stern post is attached to the keel at the stern. The transom, a flat structure that makes up the stern of the ship, is attached to the stern post. Behind the stern post, the rudder, which allows the ship to be steered, will be attached. Once the frames are all in place, the planks are put on. These make up the sides of the ship. The planks are made out of 18-foot-long oak, planed to be about 2 inches thick. It takes 3 planks to extend from the front of the ship to the back of the ship. Some of these planks have to be bent quite a bit to fit the curve of the ship. In order to bend the planks, they are soaked in the river for a few days, and then steamed for several hours in a steam box to make them soft enough to be bent. Soft planks are held in place over the frames with clamps until they're cool and stiffen into the right shape. The planks are then fastened to the frames with trunnels. The next step is to caulk the ship. Cotton, and then a fiber called hemp, is pushed in between the planks. It is a delicate but necessary job to prevent the ship from leaking. Once the ship is planked and caulked, the deck is built. First, beams are installed that go across from side to side to support the deck. To keep beams tightly in position and also to make the ship more sturdy, wooden braces called knees are added. The knees are made from the lower trunk and one root of a special kind of pine tree called a hackmatack. The advantage to this wood is that the grain carries all the way around the curve of the root. These knees give strength to the hull of the ship. Finally, the beams are covered with deck boards. The deck is also caulked to prevent water from leaking into a ship from a wave or rain. The Virginia, in order to be safer, will be equipped with a diesel engine which will connect to a propeller. Behind the propeller will hang a large wooden rudder which is made but not yet installed. In order to sail a ship, you must have sails, and the sails have to hang from masts and yard arms. In order to raise the sails, you need ropes and pulleys. We call these parts the rigging. The mast came from a big pine tree which fell in a storm and was transported to a shipyard. Our master mast maker, Fred Gosby, is shown shaping the tree into a mast. The rigging is being made in the freight shed by the rigging crew. Jim Nelson is our chief rigger. The sails were made in Maine. They are red, which is thought to be the color used back in the 1600s by most ships. Jim and his team are making blocks and lines. Fred Gosby is making some of the smaller blocks. Once completed, the ship should look something like this model. There are many other jobs to be completed before we launch the ship. We plan to get all these done by the beginning of summer 2022. Once in the water, the Virginia will take its place as the newest, but also the oldest ship on the Bath waterfront.